The plane shook violently. Drinks spilled, passengers screamed, and the captain's trembling voice echoed through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a critical failure. If there is anyone on board with combat flight experience, please come forward. Silence. A silence so heavy it pressed on every chest. And then, all eyes turned to the man in the faded blue shirt, the very man who had been mocked and humiliated just an hour earlier. Rebecca Miller leaned back in her wide leather seat, the hum of the first-class cabin wrapped around her like music. Her red dress shimmered under the cabin lights, her diamond necklace catching every glint. She swirled her glass of champagne with a careless grace, her lips curving into a smirk. Her sharp blue eyes fell on a man just beyond the curtain, fumbling with a child's backpack. His shirt was wrinkled, his jeans faded, his hair slightly unkempt from travel. Rebecca's voice sliced the quiet like glass. Some people really don't belong up here. Michael Carter heard it but didn't lift his head. His rough hands adjusted the straps of the backpack, trying to calm his daughter. Emily's small voice asked, "Daddy, is this our seat?" Her eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, sweetheart, right here," Michael whispered, forcing a smile through the sting of shame. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear Rebecca's remark. But the cruel chuckle that followed echoed louder than the engines outside. Rebecca tilted her glass toward another passenger, her laugh delicate but sharp. "First class should be first class," she quipped, her words dripping arrogance. Her companion smirked, nodding, though his eyes softened with unease. Michael tightened his jaw, his silence heavier than any insult he could have thrown back. Emily clutched her doll. Rebecca Miller leaned back in her wide leather seat, the hum of the first-class cabin wrapping around her like music. Her red dress shimmered under the cabin lights, her diamond necklace catching every glint. She swirled her glass of champagne with a careless grace, her lips curving into a smirk. Her sharp blue eyes fell on a man just beyond the curtain, fumbling with a child's backpack. His shirt was wrinkled, his jeans faded, his hair slightly unkempt from travel. Rebecca's voice sliced the quiet like glass. "Some people really don't belong up here." Michael Carter heard it but didn't lift his head. His rough hands adjusted the straps of the backpack, trying to calm his daughter. Emily's small voice asked, "Daddy, is this our seat?" her eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, sweetheart, right here," Michael whispered, forcing a smile through the sting of shame. Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to hear Rebecca's remark. But the cruel chuckle that followed echoed louder than the engines outside. Rebecca tilted her glass toward another passenger, her laugh delicate but sharp. "First class should be first class," she quipped, her words dripping arrogance. Her companion smirked, nodding, though his eyes softened with unease. Michael tightened his jaw, his silence heavier than any insult he could have thrown back. Emily clutched her doll to her chest, her tiny fingers trembling. The world had already taught her too young what humiliation felt like. The cabin settled into routine, but the tension clung like static in the air. Rebecca typed briskly on her silver laptop, glancing up only to smirk again. Michael pulled Emily close, smoothing her golden pigtails with tender patience. To her, he was a hero, even if the world only saw worn-out clothes. His eyes carried both exhaustion and a quiet fire, a history he never spoke of. A history no one in that cabin could have imagined. Then, without warning, the plane jolted violently, trays rattling, drinks spilling. Gasps and cries filled the air as passengers clutched their seats in fear. Rebecca's champagne splashed across her dress, her shriek cutting through the chaos. Michael instinctively shielded Emily, pressing her close against his chest. Oxygen masks dropped with a hiss, swinging wildly in front of shocked faces. The luxury of first class vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by raw panic. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, tight with desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost both engines. We are in critical condition." Rebecca's face drained of color, her fingers trembling around her necklace. Passengers exchanged frantic glances, prayers whispered between sobs. Michael's hand squeezed Emily's shoulder, grounding her against the storm. His eyes, once quiet, now sharp, lifted toward the cockpit door. Then came the words no one expected to hear. "If there is anyone on board with combat flight experience, please come forward." The cabin froze, silence dropping heavier than gravity itself. Even the sound of the wind outside seems to vanish in that pause. Rebecca's breath caught, her arrogance stripped away in an instant, and every eye began to search for an unlikely savior. Whispers rippled, nervous and desperate, sweeping through rows like wildfire. "That man, isn't he military?" a passenger murmured, glancing at Michael. Rebecca followed their gaze, her eyes widening in disbelief. The very man she had mocked sat still, holding his frightened daughter close. Michael rose slowly, his frame strong, his presence commanding without words. And in that moment, the entire plane's hope rested on the man in a faded blue shirt. Victoria's heels echoed sharply against the supermarket tiles as she pushed her cart closer. Every step seemed deliberate, pulling attention without her even asking for it. Shoppers glanced up, sensing the weight of her presence. Meanwhile, Michael bent down to check the price of bread, carefully considering which loaf to take. Beside him, Sophie pointed eagerly at a box of colorful cereal, her voice full of innocent hope. "Not today, sweetheart," Michael murmured, giving her a soft smile. He placed a more affordable loaf into the cart, his movement steady and patient. Victoria caught the moment and smirked, lips curling with disdain. To her, a man debating the price of bread was nothing but pathetic. She adjusted her sunglasses, preparing to make her presence known. "Do you really belong here?" she said loudly, her tone sharp and cutting. Several shoppers turned their heads, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Michael straightened, meeting her gaze calmly, refusing to be shaken. "I'm just here to buy groceries for my daughter," he replied softly, yet firmly. His voice was measured, carrying both dignity and restraint. Victoria let out a dry, mocking laugh that sliced through the aisle. "Of course you are, and I suppose every dollar matters to you." The words dripped with condescension, heavy with venom. A few customers exchanged uneasy looks, but said nothing. Sophie shrank behind her father, her small fingers clutching his hand tighter. She wanted to leave, to escape the cruelty in the woman's voice. "Daddy, let's go," Sophie whispered, eyes wide with fear. Her voice trembled as though she were afraid of being heard. Michael leaned down, brushing his thumb gently across her knuckles. "It's okay, honey, I'm right here," he reassured her, his tone steady as stone. Inside, though, a storm began to stir. He had to protect his daughter from this humiliation. But Victoria wasn't finished. She tilted her head, lowering her sunglasses slightly, eyes glittering with arrogant amusement. Her lips parted as she spoke in a new rhythm, her voice carrying words foreign to most around them. German rolled off her tongue like poisoned silk. She knew no one here would understand. At least, that's what she thought. "Armer Mann, sieht aus, als könnte sich kaum essen leisten," she muttered, her smirk widening. "Poor man, looks like he can barely afford food." A couple nearby chuckled awkwardly, not understanding the words, but catching her cruel tone. They sensed the insult, the superiority, the disdain. Victoria raised her chin as if declaring victory. Michael froze, the weight of every word sinking in. He understood it all, every sharp edge, every cruel syllable. His hand gripped Sophie's more firmly, as though shielding her from the sting of language she couldn't decipher. His face remained calm, but inside, fire flickered. He had been underestimated, insulted, and mocked, yet he refused to let anger consume him. Sophie's innocence was his shield. The little girl looked up at him with confusion, sensing something was wrong. She didn't know what the strange words meant, but she could read her father's eyes. Pressing her stuffed bunny against her chest, she sought comfort in his presence. To Sophie, her dad was more than enough. Whatever the woman had said, Michael's steady strength was louder. Around them, the supermarket had grown tense. Whispers traveled through the aisle, customers exchanging glances, some pitying, some entertained. Victoria stood tall, convinced she had reduced Michael to silence, to smallness. She believed she had reminded him of her place. But what she didn't know was that her arrogance had lit a spark. A moment was coming that would turn her smug triumph into bitter regret. Michael's jaw tightened as he absorbed the weight of her insult. He had heard such words before, though never in front of his daughter. Rage threatened to rise, but he swallowed it back, steadying his breath. Beside him, Sophie pressed closer, her wide eyes silently begging him to leave. But walking away meant letting arrogance and cruelty win. Victoria smirked, tilting her head as though she were studying a curious specimen. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" she sneered, loud enough for the nearest shoppers to hear. A few exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to intervene. Michael lifted his chin, his calm composure returning like armor. "Respect doesn't come from money," he said firmly, voice steady. The billionaire laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "Cute. Maybe you should put that on a bumper sticker. Sell it at a flea market. I'm sure it would make you a fortune." Her words dripped with venom, meant to draw blood. Sophie winced, clinging tighter to her father's arm. Michael exhaled slowly, refusing to let the venom sink into his soul. The onlookers grew restless, shifting uneasily as tension thickened in the aisle. Some whispered, "That's too much," while others stayed frozen, unwilling to get involved. Michael lifted his chin, his calm composure returning like armor. "Respect doesn't come from money," he said firmly, voice steady. The billionaire laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "Cute. Maybe you should put that on a bumper sticker. Sell it at a flea market. I'm sure it would make you a fortune." Her words dripped with venom, meant to draw blood. Sophie winced, clinging tighter to her father's arm. Michael exhaled slowly, refusing to let the venom sink into his soul. The onlookers grew restless, shifting uneasily as tension thickened in the aisle. Some whispered, "That's too much," while others stayed frozen, unwilling to get involved. Michael lifted his chin, his calm composure returning like armor. "Respect doesn't come from money," he said firmly, voice steady. The billionaire laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. "Cute. Maybe you should put that on a bumper sticker. Sell it at a flea market. I'm sure it would make you a fortune." Her words dripped with venom, meant to draw blood. Sophie winced, clinging tighter to her father's arm. Michael exhaled slowly, refusing to let the venom sink into his soul. The onlookers grew restless, shifting uneasily as tension thickened in the aisle. Some whispered, "That's too much," while others stayed frozen, unwilling to get involved. Michael knelt down to Sophie, brushing her hair gently from her face. "Don't listen to her," he whispered softly. "Some people forget what kindness looks like." Sophie nodded faintly, though her lip trembled. Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically, her posture dripping with disdain. "Honestly, it's pathetic. This store should raise its standards. People like you lower the atmosphere." Gasps rippled through the bystanders, their discomfort turning to quiet outrage. But still, no one spoke up. Michael stood tall again, his calm demeanor masking the storm within. He wanted to walk away, he truly did. But then he saw Sophie's frightened face, and something shifted inside him. If he left now, what lesson would that teach her? That cruelty could trample over dignity? That silence meant defeat? He tightened his grip on the cart, knowing he had to endure just a little longer. A young cashier watched from behind the counter, her fists clenched nervously. She wanted to say something, but fear of losing her job held her back. Other shoppers murmured in hushed tones, each waiting for someone else to step forward, but it was clear no one would. Michael realized he was alone in this moment, except for Sophie's trusting eyes. That was enough. "Why don't you just admit it?" Victoria pressed, her voice dripping with arrogance. "You're out of your league. This world isn't built for people like you." She leaned closer, her perfume heavy in the air. "And certainly not for your little girl." The words sliced deeper than any insult before, and Michael's eyes darkened. Enough was enough. He inhaled, his mind racing. He could shout, he could lash out, but that would only feed her satisfaction. Instead, he chose restraint, holding back like a bowstring pulled taut. The bystanders leaned in, sensing something was about to happen. Sophie looked up at him, her tiny hand trembling in his. And then Michael found his strength. His voice was calm, almost too calm for the storm brewing inside. "You've said enough," he murmured, his eyes locking on Victoria's. For a moment, she faltered at the intensity in his gaze. This was no longer about groceries or appearances. It was about dignity, about teaching his daughter the value of standing firm. The aisle seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment everything would change. The air grew heavy, charged with silence. Victoria's smirk widened, convinced she had won, that her words had crushed the man in front of her. Shoppers lingered nearby, caught between discomfort and curiosity. Sophie clung to her father's side, her small heart racing with fear. Michael, however, was done being silent. He straightened slowly, his presence commanding more respect than any designer dress ever could. His eyes, calm yet burning, fixed on Victoria's. Then, without warning, he spoke, not in English, but in flawless, resonant German. "Sie sollten sich schämen. Reichtum ohne Anstand ist wertlos." The words cut through the aisle like lightning. Gasps spread instantly through the crowd. Those who had chuckled earlier froze, realization dawning on them. Victoria's confidence wavered, her smug expression faltering as the meaning struck her. She hadn't expected this man, in his worn denim shirt, to understand a word. Now he had answered her in her own language, better than she ever could. You speak German?" she stammered, her voice breaking for the first time. Her lips parted in disbelief, her arrogance slipping like a mask cracking. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried weight through their calm delivery, and suddenly it was Victoria who looked small. "I understood every insult you made about me and my daughter," Michael continued, still in German. His tone was even, but each word landed heavy. "Do you think money makes you better? It doesn't. It only shows the world who you truly are." Around them, murmurs of agreement spread among the shoppers. Victoria's face flushed deep crimson, her hands tightening around her designer bag. She opened her mouth to reply, but no sound came. The authority she always carried seemed to vanish into thin air. All she could feel was the weight of dozens of eyes staring at her. For once, she was the one being judged. Sophie looked up at her father, her confusion melting into awe. Though she didn't understand the language, she saw the strength in his voice, the pride in his posture. Her tiny lips curved into a smile, her fear fading away. In that moment, she realized her dad wasn't just gentle, he was powerful. The bystanders began to nod, whispers shifting from awkwardness to admiration. "Wow, did you hear that?" someone murmured. "He put her in her place." A cashier clapped quietly, soon followed by others who dared to show approval. The tide had turned. Michael, the man they had pitied, had just humbled a billionaire. Victoria lowered her sunglasses, trying to mask her humiliation, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the crowd had seen it all. Her aura of superiority crumbled, leaving only the raw truth. Arrogance could not withstand dignity. She turned her face away, wishing she could disappear. Michael stood tall, unshaken. The silence that followed was different now, charged not with fear, but with respect. Victoria had walked in to prove her dominance, but she had ignited a lesson she never expected. And Michael, without anger or cruelty, had turned her weapon back on her. The battle was over, but the story was far from finished. Victoria tried to laugh, forcing her voice into the cold tone she always carried. "Well, I was only joking," she said, but the tremor in her words betrayed her. Her eyes darted nervously across the crowd that no longer admired her. Instead, she saw judgment, disapproval, and even disgust. The queen of the room had lost her crown. Michael shook his head slowly, never raising his voice. "No," he replied firmly, "you weren't joking. You wanted to humiliate someone you thought was beneath you." His words rang with the clarity of truth, slicing through the air. Around them, people murmured in agreement, their gazes hardening toward Victoria. Sophie gripped his hand, her small smile returning. The aisle grew still, as though holding its breath. A young man near the produce section called out, "He's right, we all heard you." A mother with her children added, "Money doesn't buy you class." Each voice emboldened the next, until the silence was filled with whispers of support for Michael. Victoria's face flushed deeper with every passing second. Her hands shook as she clutched her Chanel bag tighter, knuckles whitening. For years, she had commanded fear and envy everywhere she went. Now she was cornered, surrounded not by admirers, but by witnesses to her downfall. Michael bent down to Sophie, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "See, sweetheart, never let anyone tell you what you're worth." Sophie's eyes lit up, her fear replaced with pride. "You're the best, Daddy," she whispered, hugging his arm tightly. The crowd softened, their admiration shifting fully to the man in the denim shirt. His quiet dignity had outshined the billionaire's arrogance. Applause began, small at first, then louder, spreading through the supermarket. The sound of clapping grew into a wave that echoed off the aisles. Shoppers smiled, some even cheering softly as Michael stood tall, his daughter at his side. Victoria's lips trembled as she tried to salvage her composure. But every clap was a nail in the coffin of her superiority. She had never felt smaller in her life. Her heels clicked frantically as she spun her cart around, trying to escape the spotlight. She moved faster than she ever had, her usual strut replaced by a desperate retreat. The applause followed her, each step away punctuating her defeat. Her head lowered, her power stripped. For once, she was just another customer fleeing shame. Michael remained still, watching her vanish down the aisle. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't need to. His victory was not about proving her wrong, but about showing Sophie what dignity looked like. Around him, the applause slowly faded into respectful silence. All eyes remained on the father and daughter who had quietly triumphed. Sophie leaned her head against his arm, her smile pure and content. "Daddy, you were amazing," she whispered, her voice trembling with joy. Michael kissed the top of her head gently, whispering back, "I only wanted to protect you." His words carried more power than any insult ever could. And in that moment, Sophie's admiration was worth more than gold. The climax of the confrontation had passed, but its impact lingered. Victoria had walked away in disgrace, her arrogance shattered in front of dozens of witnesses. Michael had stood his ground, not with anger, but with calm strength. and Sophie had learned a lesson that would stay with her forever. True power comes not from wealth, but from character. As the last echoes of applause faded, the supermarket returned to its steady rhythm. Yet the air still carried a charge, as though everyone had witnessed something rare and unforgettable. Shoppers glanced at Michael with quiet admiration, nodding respectfully as they passed. Sophie stood close by, her small hand never leaving his. The moment had ended, but its impact lingered. An elderly woman with silver hair approached Michael, her cart full of produce. "Young man," she said warmly, her voice trembling with emotion, "that was beautiful. You reminded us all what dignity truly means." Michael offered a modest smile, shaking his head lightly. "I only wanted to set the right example for my daughter." His humility touched her even more deeply. Sophie's arms wrapped around his waist in a sudden hug, her pink dress brushing against his denim shirt. "You're the best daddy in the world," she declared proudly, her stuffed bunny squished between them. Michael bent down, kissing the top of her head softly. "As long as you know that, nothing else matters," he whispered. And for Sophie, those words were enough. The cashier who had watched nervously earlier finally found her courage. She stepped forward, her eyes shining. "Sir, that was incredible. I wish more people were like you." Michael nodded gently, his gratitude quiet but sincere. "Thank you, but honestly, I just hope she thinks twice next time." The cashier smiled, reassured by his calm strength. Other shoppers began to disperse, their carts rattling down different aisles. Yet some lingered, casting admiring glances at Michael as though he were more than just a customer. He wasn't a hero in a cape, but in that moment, he felt like one in Sophie's eyes. She tugged his sleeve, holding up the box of star cookies. "Daddy, can we get it now?" Michael chuckled, his laughter easing the tension that still clung to the air. "Yes, sweetheart, today we can." He placed the cookies gently into their cart, as if it were a prize well earned. Sophie's face lit up with delight, her worries completely forgotten. Around them, the store seemed brighter, lighter, touched by a new sense of kindness. Victoria was gone, but her absence spoke louder than her presence ever had. In her place remained a lesson carved into every witness. Wealth and power cannot silence truth spoken with dignity. Michael had not shouted, had not lashed out, yet he had won. And that quiet victory resonated far beyond one supermarket aisle. As they continued shopping, Michael chose vegetables and pasta, while Sophie hummed beside him, her bunny bouncing with each step. Life returned to normal, but it felt different now. They were not just father and daughter, they were a team that had faced cruelty and stood stronger for it. Shoppers gave them space, but their eyes carried respect. At the checkout, the cashier rang up their items with extra care. "No charge for the cookies," she whispered with a wink. Michael started to protest, but she shook her head firmly. "Consider it a gift for reminding us all what really matters." He relented with a grateful nod, touched by the simple gesture. Sophie squealed softly, clutching the cookies to her chest. They left the store with bags in hand, the setting sun painting the parking lot in warm gold. Michael loaded groceries into the back of his old car, while Sophie climbed inside, still humming. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, letting the weight slide from his shoulders. The world had tried to humiliate him, but love and dignity had prevailed. And that, he knew, was enough. The parking lot glowed beneath the golden sunset, each car bathed in soft amber light. Michael placed the last bag in the trunk, closing it with a quiet sigh of relief. Sophie sat in the back seat, hugging her cookies and stuffed bunny, her smile wide and unbroken. She hummed a little tune, carefree as only a child could be. For her, the world was safe again. Across the lot, Victoria sat motionless in her luxury car. The engine purred softly, but she made no move to leave. For once, she avoided her own reflection in the mirror. Her sunglasses lay on the passenger seat, revealing eyes that were no longer cold, but troubled. She had power, money, and status, yet none of it shielded her from shame. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as the scene replayed in her mind. A single father, calm and steady, had undone her arrogance in front of everyone. His words in German rang in her ears, haunting her. Wealth without decency is worthless. She had spent a lifetime building walls of luxury, only to be pierced by a truth she could not deny. Meanwhile, Michael opened the driver's side door and looked back at Sophie. "Ready to go home, kiddo?" he asked with a gentle smile. Sophie nodded, her little legs swinging back and forth. "Yep," she chirped, clutching her cookies. Michael's heart swelled at her innocence. In her joy, he found his greatest reward. The old car rumbled to life, its sound humble yet strong. As it rolled past, Victoria lowered her gaze, unable to meet the sight of the family she had tried to belittle. The contrast was undeniable. One life built on pride, another on love. Michael's victory wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, powerful, and enduring. The kind of triumph no wealth could buy. Inside the supermarket, whispers still lingered among employees and customers. "Did you see the way he stood up to her?" one clerk asked. "He was amazing," another replied. The story had already begun to spread, not as gossip, but as inspiration. In a world quick to judge by appearances, Michael's dignity was unforgettable. For Sophie, the lesson was simple but profound. She had seen her father humiliated and then rise with grace. She had learned that strength wasn't about shouting the loudest, but about knowing your worth. Holding her bunny close, she whispered softly, "Daddy's my hero." And in her heart, that truth would last forever. Victoria finally started her car, driving off into the fading light. Her departure wasn't triumphant, but heavy with regret. She had been given a mirror, and what she saw wasn't pretty. Perhaps she would change, perhaps she wouldn't, but the seed of shame had been planted, and Michael's words would echo long after. As the sky deepened into twilight, Michael and Sophie drove home, their laughter filling the small car. They didn't have riches, but they had something greater: love, resilience, and respect. Life would continue with its challenges, but they would face it together. And together, they were unstoppable. The moral was clear: never judge a person by their appearance. True wealth is not measured by what's in your bank account, but by the kindness in your heart. Michael had taught his daughter, and everyone who witnessed it, a timeless truth. And as the narrator's voice fades, a final message remains. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Remember, money fades, but character lasts forever.